Hi guys, my name is MC Reed and I am a sales engineer here at Postman. I'm going to be walking us through, the setup process for Azure Active Directory as an SSO provider for Postman. I'm starting on a guru card that I put together that shows a number of different types of information related to SSO and SCIM, including value prop, how we position this to customers. There's a lot of setup related materials down at the bottom. I also took some time to walk through the exact usage scenarios that we're actually considering here with our customers to clearly outline the difference between them and what value they add. So obviously without SSO, users are going to be manually provisioning, or admins are going to be manually provisioning users inside of Postman, and those users are going to be siloed from all of the other different enterprise systems. There are three scenarios really that include SSO. So one is SSO without just-in-time provisioning. It seems to me that this is what the industry is calling it. What that means is that eventually we're going to have a single sign-on configuration, but first, a user needs to be manually created inside of the IDP provider. A user needs to be manually provisioned inside of Postman. The user needs to log in to link the two users together, and then they can sign in. And then even after that, the admin will still need to go into Postman and provision the user's access. With just-in-time provisioning, the user is provisioned once inside of the IDP provider. And the first time that that user goes to sign into Postman, they can automatically sign directly into the SSO provider. And if that sign-in happens correctly, a user will be provisioned inside of Postman with default access. Then the Postman admin just needs to go in and provision their actual access. Now that eliminates the steps, but the devil's in the details, because what it does, it eliminates all the wait time. Every time there's a human involved, someone else has got to wait for the next step to happen before they can do what they need to do. Provision, wait for user to log in. Provision in Postman, wait for the user to log in. Then go back into Postman and tie the two together. Obviously, if you're doing that for hundreds of users or more, that's just not a scalable process. So SSO with just-in-time provisioning means that when that user, after we set them up in the IDP, the user goes to log into Postman, it's automatically going to provision inside of Postman. We do not currently support SCIM for Azure 2.0, and that's because we found that that Azure IDP is not a perfectly SCIM 2.0 compliant protocol. So we're working with Microsoft on that right now. Once we have that, rather than even the manual steps that we talked about involving the user, we provision the user inside of the IDP provider, and it automatically provisions the user inside of Postman. At that point, we just need to wait for the user to log in for the first time, if they want to use it, and also for the Postman admin to go in and define their, not their default access, but their actual level of access. But once we define them inside of Azure, it'll be set up across the board. What we're going to be dealing with today is this step number 2, SSO with just-in-time provisioning. With that said, I have opened my Azure portal environment. I also have open a Postman sandbox. If this is just the SCs watching, this is going to be probably where you're doing this, but obviously this process is going to relate to any environment you happen to use. I'm going to go in. We're going to go to Manage Team. I want to make sure, because I've run through some iterations, that I don't have that user here. I don't. I'm going to go to Team Settings, Authentication. I'm going to create a new authentication mechanism. Now, it's widely known that we cannot have two SAML 2.0 providers active at one time. Make sure that it's understood that we cannot have two SAML 2.0 providers configured at the same time, with this default Google Auth 2.0 option being the exception. So if you've already got Okta configured in your environment, anything else, you need to delete it first, or you will get an error message. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add New Authentication. I'm going to choose ADFS. Between you, me, and the water cooler, it doesn't seem that there's a whole lot of difference between this and this, the generic option. I'm going to go ahead and just call this Azure, click on Proceed. And of course, I'm given this information. I need to send this information over to Azure. I need to receive information back from Azure. With that said, I'm going to come over to Azure. If you happen to be using a fresh environment, a lot of these items won't be here. You can manually type Azure Active Directory at the top. I've been testing, so this is already here for me, but you want to navigate to this portion. We're going to be dealing with two sections in Azure Active Directory. We're going to create the users that will be signing into Postman. In the real world, those users are already going to be set up. So if you're doing some sort of post-sales setup, you won't have to go to this section. For the sandbox, I do want you to go to this section so that you can understand cradle to grave how all the pieces fit together. The second part is the enterprise applications section. That's going to be the point of integration. That's where we're going to identify we want to integrate with Postman, and here are the users that are allowed to use the integration. So let's start first by creating user. My admin user is already here. That allows me to log into this environment. I am going to create a new login user. I'll call him SSO1. And SSO1, doesn't matter what you put into these fields, you just need to fill them out. And it looks like this is optional here. I am going to go ahead and give it my own password. Do whatever works for you. If you have the password automatically generated, this email address needs to be real because it's going to send the user an email so that they can log in and create a password. In your test environment, this email address is not going to be real, so you need to go ahead and set your password. So my user is now created. We're going to see that I have an email address there. I'm going to back out to Azure Active Directory. I'm going to go down to Enterprise Applications, and I'm going to click on New Application. We're going to type in Postman. I'm going to choose it. And we're going to create an integration associated with our Active Directory object here. Just as an aside, you'll see automatic provisioning is not supported here. That's SCIM. All right, that's what we don't have just yet. So we're going to be dealing with two tabs here. First, associating the users with this Postman integration, essentially the users that are allowed to log into Postman. In the real world, there can be groups, there can be users, but they're all going to come in here. We're then going to set up the parameters of the actual single sign-on. That's where we're going to data share between this screen and this screen. In the future, we'll be able to set up SCIM itself as well. Clicking on the first tab, actually clicking on the link, I'm going to add the user that we just created, SSO1. I'm going to assign. I'm then going to go ahead and just back out. See how far back do I need to go? Right here. I'm going to click on the second link. I'm going to choose SAML. Now, the information that we pass back and forth is going to be in this first section. What I found in my testing is go ahead and get rid of the asterisk and the slash. You'll see here that that's what it wants on this side anyway. The second value is going to be the ACS URL that's labeled here. Let's copy this bad boy over. The sign-in URL is going to be our login URL. And the relay state over on the right side is going to be generated with this button here. The login URL is optional. We will not be filling it in. Click on Save. I'm going to X out of here. We do need to give information to Postman. Scroll down to section 3. You want the federated metadata XML. Inside of Postman, we're going to click on Upload File. I'm going to choose the XML file that I just downloaded. You're going to see that these fields all get populated. Now, just-in-time provisioning, we refer to as this checkbox at the bottom. Automatically add new users using this authentication method to my team. Again, that means after we provision the user inside of the IDP, the user can log in for the first time using the single sign-on option to Postman, excuse me. And if they sign in correctly, it will provision a user inside of Postman with default permissions. So I'm going to click on save. I'm going to go back to authentication. I've got my Azure authentication. I'm going to activate it. So now I'm going to go back to my Active Directory user. I want to make sure that I remember the username of my user is SSO1. We're going to test this out. I'm going to open an incognito window, postman.com/explore. I'm going to sign in. Instead of signing in here, this will essentially be signing in locally. I want to sign in using the SSO. Why is that so important? Because I don't exist as a user inside of Postman yet. If I try to sign in here, it will fail. Click on sign in with single sign-on. We're going to type in our domain name. For our sandbox, this happens to be sc-iam-sandbox or whatever environment you happen to be using. I'm going to choose the Azure option. I'm going to copy and paste the user that I just created. I'm going to type in that default password. It is going to have me, in this particular environment with Azure, it does have me go ahead and set a new password. Now, what I should see at this point is that it takes me through, so the sign-in occurred correctly. I logged into the IDP. These are just additional settings that are specific to this IDP environment. It wants me to set up that authenticator app on my phone. I'm going to skip that for now. Of course, in the customer's environment, you may or may not see these things. Now we see that we're setting up a new user inside of Postman. Give myself a name and just work my way up to the point where we can see that that user has been correctly created. I'll give myself a default team workspace. So I'm logged in, I'm me, I'm this guy. We can see the unique identifier that I had over in Azure. I'm going to refresh. It's important to refresh the page, otherwise you're going to take a look at your team members and it will not have a new user there. But now if I go to manage my team, we see our new user. That new user has default permissions. The Postman admin will still need to go in and give them the correct permissions. But we did eliminate the step of manually provision the user in Postman and all of the wait time associated with that.